The Queen of the Skies in Trouble, a contrast synopsis. During a night flight from New York to London, Captain Robert finds himself confronted with a situation that will test his 25 years of experience in commercial aviation. When multiple Boeing 747-400 systems begin to fail over the North Atlantic, far from any alternate airport, he must make decisions that could determine the fate of 412 people on board. Between hydraulic failures, pressurization problems, and adverse weather conditions, this is the story of how experience, training, and composure under pressure can make the difference between tragedy and a miracle in the skies. Dodrika's complete story. I never thought that what seemed like a routine night would become the most intense experience of my commercial pilot career. My name is Robert. I'm 52 years old, and for more than 2 decades I've commanded commercial aircraft, with the last 15 years dedicated exclusively to the Boeing 747, the majestic Queen of the Skies. That Tuesday in September started like any other. Briefing at 7:30 p.m., pre-flight inspection at 8:15 p.m., and scheduled takeoff at 10:40 p.m. from John F. Kennedy International Airport, bound for Heathrow Airport in London. American Airlines Flight 100 was a route I knew like the back of my hand. 8 hours and 45 minutes of flight over the North Atlantic, carrying 396 passengers and 16 crew members in our Boeing 747-400, tail number N747AA. Beside me sat First Officer Charles, a sharp 35-year-old with whom I'd flown several times and who demonstrated excellent technical competence. In the jump seats behind us, Check Airman Jennifer, who was accompanying Charles in his upgrade process to captain, and Flight Engineer John, a 28-year veteran with the company. Weather conditions at JFK were perfect. Clear skies, wind from 80 degrees at 8 knots, visibility greater than 10 miles. Our takeoff weight was 385 tons, well within normal parameters for the route. During briefing, we'd reviewed our route. Departure via runway 04L, following the Cameron 4 departure, then direct to waypoint Hapi, following airway J121 to Neon, and then departing for the oceanic crossing via Nat Track Delta to Dogal, our entry point into European airspace. The takeoff went off without a hitch. All 4 Pratt & Whitney PW4056 engines responded beautifully, delivering the 56,750 pounds of thrust each that we needed to get our considerable weight airborne. Rotation occurred at 166 knots, and our V2 safety speed was reached at 174 knots. We climbed initially to flight level 290, about 29,000 feet, as cleared by air traffic control. American 100, contact New York departure on 125.7, transmitted JFK Tower. New York departure 125.7, American 100, thanks and good evening, I replied, while Charles tuned the frequency on the radio. New York departure, American 100, level 290, estimating Hapi at 2315, I reported to the new controller. American 100, New York departure, radar contact, maintain flight level 290, cleared direct Hapi, report passing. The night was crystal clear, and the lights of the New York metropolitan area spread out like a brilliant carpet below us. The navigation system was working flawlessly, with the FMS, Flight Management System, calculating our route with precision. Our cruise speed was stabilized at Mach 0.84, approximately 520 miles per hour at that altitude. At 11:45 p.m., already over the ocean and flying in total darkness, we received clearance to climb to flight level 330. This was our optimized altitude for the aircraft's current weight, providing the best fuel consumption for the oceanic crossing. The flight was proceeding absolutely normally, with all systems functioning within parameters. The passengers had already been served dinner, and most were beginning to settle in for sleep during the overnight crossing. "Robert, how about some coffee?" asked Charles, always thoughtful. "Good idea. John, you want anything from the galley?" "Coffee sounds great, Captain," replied the flight engineer, who was currently checking engine performance data at his station. Charles keyed the interphone and asked Michelle, our lead flight attendant, to bring our drinks. Company protocol dictated that both pilots could never leave the cockpit simultaneously during cruise flight, especially over the ocean. It was 00:47 UTC when everything started to change. We'd been airborne for just over 2 hours, approximately 380 nautical miles northeast of Boston, when the first alert sounded in the cockpit. A sharp, piercing sound that any pilot recognizes immediately. The master warning. ICUS is showing a failure in hydraulic system 2, announced John, reading the data on his monitoring screen. I quickly glanced at the main panel and confirmed the yellow light for hydraulic system 2 was illuminated and pressure had dropped to 1200 psi when normal would be 3000 psi. Let's get the hydraulic system checklist, I said, maintaining the calm I'd learned over decades of experience. Charles opened the quick reference handbook and located the appropriate procedure. HYD SWIS2 press low, he read. First step, verify electric pump 2 is on. Electric pump 2 is on, confirmed John. Second step, check system pressure filter. Filter normal, no bypass indication, John reported again. We continued following the checklist meticulously. The Boeing 747's hydraulic system 2 is responsible for controlling various flight control surfaces, including some flaps, slats, spoilers, and part of the braking system. Fortunately, the 747 has 3 independent hydraulic systems, so the loss of one system, while serious, didn't represent an immediate emergency. Looks like we have an internal leak in the System 2 main pump, I concluded after completing all checklist items. Let's shut down the pump to prevent further fluid loss and continue with Systems 1 and 3. But the night had more surprises in store for us. 15 minutes later, at 0102 UTC, a new alert echoed through the cockpit, another master warning, this time accompanied by a flashing red light. Pressurization sys failed, Charles read on the ECAS display. My heart rate picked up. A pressurization problem over the ocean at 33,000 feet was a much more serious situation than the previous hydraulic failure. John, status on the outflow valves, I requested immediately. Outflow valve 1 is stuck in intermediate position. Outflow valve 2 is responding normally, he reported after checking the system. Cabin altitude? I asked, my main concern at that moment. Climbing through 8,500 feet and rate of climb increasing, John responded, with an expression of concern that mirrored my own. Normal cabin altitude during cruise flight should be around 6,000 to 7,000 feet, even while flying at 33,000 feet actual. The pressurization system maintains a pressure differential between the aircraft's interior and exterior, creating a breathable environment for passengers and crew. With an outflow valve stuck in intermediate position, we were gradually losing pressurization. Charles, get the pressurization loss checklist. John, monitor cabin altitude. If it goes through 10,000 feet, we're going to have to initiate an emergency descent, I instructed while mentally calculating our options. We were approximately 1,200 nautical miles from Boston and about 1,800 nautical miles from the Azores, our closest alternate in the direction we were flying. An emergency descent to 10,000 feet would mean much higher fuel consumption, and I needed to calculate whether we could reach either of these airports with the fuel we had on board. Cabin altitude passing 9,500 feet, announced John. Jennifer, calculate our fuel endurance at 10,000 feet to Boston and to the Azores, I requested of the check airman, who immediately began working with the performance tables. 10,000 feet, Captain, announced John, beginning emergency descent. Charles, declare emergency with Boston Center and request immediate descent clearance. I pushed the yoke forward and simultaneously reduced engine power. The big Boeing began descending at a rate of 3,000 feet per minute while I announced to the cabin, "Attention cabin crew, this is the captain. We are beginning an emergency descent due to a pressurization problem. Ensure all passengers have their seatbelts fastened and assume emergency positions until further notice. Boston Center, American 100, Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. Loss of pressurization, beginning emergency descent, requesting flight level 100. American 100, Boston Center, emergency acknowledged. Cleared immediate descent to flight level 100, advise when level. Any other assistance required? Negative at this time, Boston. We'll advise our intentions once we assess the situation. The descent was intense. The passengers certainly felt the sudden change, and I could imagine the confusion in the cabin. Michelle and her crew were experienced professionals who would know how to maintain control of the situation, but it was still a frightening experience for those not accustomed to it. "Captain, endurance calculated," reported Jennifer. "To Boston at 10,000 feet with current winds, we'll need approximately 28,600 pounds of fuel. To the Azores, about 40,700 pounds. We currently have 46,700 pounds on board." It was tight for the Azores, but feasible for Boston. However, Boston meant turning back almost 3 hours of flight in the opposite direction, and I knew the passengers had commitments in London. Additionally, I needed to consider the weather at both airports. "Charles, request weather information for Boston and the Azores. I also want to know conditions at Reykjavik and Shannon, in case we need more alternates." We leveled off at 10,000 feet at 01 to 18 UTC. Cabin altitude had stabilized at 10,200 feet, still within acceptable parameters, but at the limit. We could continue flying, but any additional deterioration in the pressurization system would force us to descend even further, definitely compromising our range. Boston reports, wind 110 degrees at 15 knots, visibility 8 miles, moderate rain, scattered clouds at 1,500 feet, temperature 72 degrees, Charles reported. Azores reports, wind 050 degrees at 22 knots, gusts to 35 knots, visibility greater than 10 miles, few clouds at 2,500 feet, temperature 64 degrees. The Azores had better conditions, but the strong winds concerned me. With hydraulic system 2 inoperative and now flying at 10,000 feet instead of the planned 33,000, I needed to make a decision that would affect hundreds of people. "John, how are the other systems? Any additional anomalies?" "Hydraulic systems 1 and 3 normal, engines operating within parameters. All other systems showing normal performance, Captain." That's when Michelle called from the cabin interphone. "Captain, we have a passenger here who's a doctor and would like to speak with you about a patient who's having breathing difficulties." That's all I needed. A medical problem on top of the technical issues I was already dealing with. "Transfer the call up here, Michelle." "Captain, this is Dr. Michael Thompson, cardiologist. I have an elderly woman here, approximately 70 years old, who's been experiencing significant respiratory distress since we began the descent. She has a history of cardiac problems and the pressure change seems to have aggravated her condition. I believe it would be prudent to seek ground medical assistance as soon as possible. The situation was getting more complex by the minute. Now I had a medical emergency in addition to the technical problems. This completely changed the decision dynamics. Doctor, thank you for the information. We're already evaluating our landing options. Do you consider this a situation that can wait approximately 2.5 hours? Captain, it's hard to say. She's stable at the moment, but given her age and cardiac history, I wouldn't recommend prolonging this situation for very long. Understood. We'll accelerate our decision-making process. I hung up the interphone and looked at my crew. Folks, change of priorities. We have a medical emergency in addition to our technical problems. This means Boston has become our best option, even if it means turning back. Charles, declare to Boston Center that we now also have a medical emergency on board and that we intend to land in Boston. Request direct vectors and clearance to climb to flight level 220 to improve our fuel efficiency. John, recalculate fuel consumption for a climb to flight level 220. Jennifer, check the medical emergency manual for procedures we should follow. Over the next 15 minutes, we completely reorganized our flight plan. Boston Center was extremely cooperative, providing direct vectors to the airport and coordinating with the appropriate agencies so that an ambulance would be waiting for our arrival. We managed to climb to 22,000 feet, an altitude that gave us better fuel efficiency while still maintaining an acceptable cabin altitude. The pressurization system, though degraded, was managing to keep the situation controllable at that altitude. American 100, Boston Center, be advised the airport has been notified of your emergency. Ambulance and medical team will be standing by. Fire and rescue also on standby as standard procedure. Boston Center, American 100, much appreciated for the assistance. We estimate arrival in Boston at 03:45 UTC. But the night's problems weren't over yet. At 02:23 UTC, when we were approximately 45 minutes from Boston, a third alert echoed through the cockpit. The stall warning system began emitting an intermittent sound. Stall warning system failure, Charles read on the EICAS display. The stall warning system is crucial to flight safety. It constantly monitors the wing's angle of attack and alerts pilots when the aircraft is approaching a loss of lift condition. Without this system, we'd need to rely entirely on our experience and basic flight instruments. One more for our collection, I commented, trying to keep the crew's morale up. John, turn off the stall warning system and log it in the maintenance book. We'll fly with conservative speed parameters. Captain, said Jennifer, checking the manual with these 3 simultaneous failures, hydraulic, pressurization and stall warning, we're technically in a multiple emergency situation. The manual recommends landing at the nearest suitable airport. That's exactly what we're doing, I replied. Charles, informed Boston that we now also have a stall warning system failure. They need to know everything. The approach into Boston would be challenging. With hydraulic system 2 inoperative, we'd have reduced braking capacity and some spoilers wouldn't function normally. Without the stall warning system, I'd need to maintain conservative speeds throughout the approach. And with the degraded pressurization system, any altitude changes should be made gradually to avoid aggravating the passenger's condition. Boston approach American 100, descending for flight level 100, information Delta copied. American 100 Boston approach, good evening. Radar contact, descend and maintain 4,000 feet, altimeter 30.16, runway in use 04R, wind 120 degrees at 18 knots. Confirm status of emergency. Affirmative, Boston. Multiple emergency. Hydraulic system 2 failure. Partial pressurization system failure. Stall warning system failure. Plus medical emergency on board. Requesting ILS runway 04R. Stabilized approach. American 100, roger. Cleared ILS runway 04R. Turn left, heading 270. Descend and maintain 3,000 feet. Report established on the localizer. We began preparations for the approach. With hydraulic system 2 inoperative, I conducted a specific briefing for this condition. Approach speed increased by 5 knots, careful use of brakes, and preparation for a longer landing roll than normal. John, what's our fuel quantity? 31,300 pounds, Captain. Sufficient for the approach with good margin. At Aero 335 UTC, we were established on the localizer for runway Aero 4R at Boston, descending on a nighttime ILS approach. The city lights stretched out below us, but my concentration was totally focused on the instruments and safely conducting the aircraft with degraded systems. 1,000 feet, aircraft stabilized, speed 158 knots, full configuration, announced Charles following our standard procedures. Checks complete, I responded, keeping the aircraft aligned with the runway. 500 feet, runway in sight, Charles continued, continuing for landing. 200 feet, 50 feet, 40, 30, 20, 10. The touchdown was smooth, just a slight bump when the main gear wheels made contact with the asphalt of runway 04R. I immediately applied reverse thrust and began braking, being careful not to overload the remaining hydraulic system. Boston Tower, American 100 on the ground, runway will be clear at the next intersection. American 100, taxi via taxiway Alpha to gate 12, ambulance following. As we taxied to the gate, I could see the ambulance and emergency vehicles accompanying us. It was 03:48 UTC when I finally shut down the engines at gate 12 of Terminal B. Gentlemen, excellent work by the entire crew, I said, finally allowing myself to relax a bit. John, prepare the maintenance write-up with all the failures. Charles and Jennifer, we'll debrief with the mechanics once the situation normalizes. The passenger who had fallen ill was immediately attended to by the medical team and taken to the hospital. We learned later that she recovered completely and was able to continue her journey 2 days later. The other 411 passengers were accommodated in hotels and were able to proceed to London on the next flight, after a delay of approximately 18 hours. The subsequent investigation revealed that the hydraulic system 2 failure was caused by a rupture in the high-pressure line, probably due to normal wear of a component that was near its service life limit. The pressurization problem was related to a failure in the actuator of outflow valve number 1, which stuck in intermediate position due to a defect in the electric motor that controlled it. The stall warning system had a failure in the central processor, a rare but not unprecedented electronic failure. What made the situation exceptional was the combination of the 3 failures in such a short period. The statistical probability of this happening is extremely low, but as any experienced pilot knows, commercial aviation is a world where the improbable sometimes becomes reality, and that's what we constantly train for. During the 3 days we remained in Boston waiting for replacement parts and repairs, I had time to reflect on that night. In 25 years of career, I'd faced various emergency situations: engine problems, hydraulic failures, adverse weather conditions, medical emergencies. But never a combination as complex as that one. What impressed me most was how the entire crew worked in a coordinated manner. Charles, despite his relative inexperience in emergency situations, maintained his composure and executed all procedures flawlessly. John, with his 3 decades of experience as a flight engineer, was fundamental in the quick and accurate diagnosis of each problem. Jennifer, even though she was a check airman and not part of the operating crew, contributed significantly with her calculations and manual consultations. But beyond the crew's technical competence, what really made the difference was training. Hours and hours in the simulator, where we practice emergency scenarios of the most varied natures. Procedures memorized and executed automatically, allowing our conscious mind to focus on strategic decision-making. The discipline of following checklists even under extreme pressure. Clear and objective communication, leaving no room for misunderstandings. During the repairs, I spoke with the mechanics responsible for maintenance. I discovered that our aircraft, N747AA, had 18 years of operation and more than 67,000 flight hours. It was a veteran of the skies that had already transported millions of passengers over nearly 2 decades. The failures we encountered, though multiple and simultaneous, were all related to normal wear of components that were being replaced according to the preventive maintenance schedule. This reminded me of a conversation I'd had years ago with a Boeing engineer. He explained that the 747 was designed with multiple redundancies exactly for situations like this. Even with 3 different systems presenting failures, the aircraft was still perfectly controllable and capable of making a safe landing. The Queen of the Skies was built to bring her passengers back home, even when things go wrong, were his words. On the 3rd day in Boston, while supervising the post-maintenance tests, I received a call from Dorothy, the passenger who had fallen ill during the flight. She insisted on personally thanking me for the decision to land in Boston. According to her, the hospital doctors confirmed that she had experienced a minor cardiac episode, probably related to the stress of depressurization. If we had continued to the Azores or any other more distant destination, the consequences could have been much more serious. "Captain," she said, "you and your crew saved my life. I know that decision certainly caused inconvenience to many people, but I wanted you to know that you made the right decision." Those words moved me deeply. In our profession, we rarely receive direct feedback about the impact of our decisions on people's lives. We transport thousands of passengers every year, and most of the time they disembark without even realizing all the small and large challenges we face to bring them safely to their destination. On the morning of the 4th day, we conducted post-maintenance test flights. All systems were functioning perfectly. Hydraulic System 2 had been completely overhauled, with replacement of the ruptured line and complete inspection of all connections. The pressurization system received a new outflow valve and actuator, plus complete calibration of the control system. The stall warning system was repaired with replacement of the central processor and verification of all associated wiring. In the afternoon, we received clearance from maintenance and the aviation authority to return to regular service. The return flight to New York proceeded without any incidents, and 2 days later, I was flying the same route to London again, this time without surprises. But that experience marked me profoundly, not just because of the technical aspects, but because of the reminder of how commercial aviation is truly teamwork. From the air traffic controllers who guided us safely through the emergency, to the cabin crew who kept the passengers calm and informed, to the mechanics and ground specialists who worked tirelessly to repair our aircraft. It also made me reflect on the responsibility we carry on our shoulders with every flight. 300, 400, sometimes more than 500 people trust their lives to our competence, experience, and judgment. It's a responsibility I take very seriously, and one that became even more real after that night over the Atlantic. Weeks later, I received a detailed report from the investigation conducted by the NTSB, National Transportation Safety Board. The report concluded that all crew actions were appropriate and followed established procedures. The decision to land in Boston was considered correct, taking into consideration not only the technical problems, but also the medical emergency on board. Most interesting was a recommendation included in the report, that events like this be used in training programs to demonstrate how multiple failures can occur simultaneously, and how crew coordination and decision-making based on clear priorities are fundamental to the safe resolution of complex emergencies. A few months later, I was invited to participate in a training program at the company's base, where I shared this experience with other captains and first officers. It was interesting to observe how each group of pilots would have made slightly different decisions, but always within established safety parameters. Some would have chosen to continue to the Azores. Others would also have returned to Boston, but for different reasons. What became clear to everyone was that there's no single, correct answer for complex situations like this. What matters is following a structured decision-making methodology. Identify the problem, evaluate available options, consider all relevant factors, technical, meteorological, medical, operational, and make the decision that offers the greatest safety margin for everyone on board. During that training session, a young first officer asked me how I had managed to stay calm throughout the entire situation. My answer was simple: training and experience, but also something I'd learned over the years. In emergency situations, panic is our greatest enemy. When we panic, we lose the ability to think clearly and make rational decisions. The airplane doesn't care if you're nervous or calm, I told him. It simply responds to the commands you give it. But your ability to give the right commands depends entirely on keeping your mind clear and focused. I also explained that teamwork is absolutely fundamental. No pilot, however experienced, can manage a complex emergency situation alone. Each crew member has a specific role, and mutual trust is essential. Charles didn't hesitate to follow my instructions, even while being responsible for the most critical calculations and communications. John provided accurate and reliable technical information about system status. Jennifer contributed analyses and manual consultations that were crucial to our decision-making. Today, almost 2 years after that memorable flight, I continue flying the Boeing 747 on international routes. Every time I enter that familiar cockpit, I think about the night when the Queen of the Skies showed why she deserves that title. Even when multiple systems failed simultaneously, she continued flying with the dignity and reliability that made her legendary in commercial aviation. But I also think about the importance of constant preparation. In the simulators, we continue practicing increasingly complex emergency scenarios. In safety meetings, we discuss not only our procedures, but also lessons learned from similar events around the world. In aviation medicine, we stay updated on how different medical conditions can be affected by flight conditions, because ultimately, our profession is based on the premise that preparation for the unexpected is what allows us to bring our passengers safely to their destination, even when the unexpected decides to show up all at once on a dark night over the North Atlantic. Commercial aviation has evolved tremendously since the first commercial flights. We have more advanced aircraft today, more reliable systems, more precise procedures, more comprehensive training. But one thing has never changed: the need for well-trained, experienced pilots capable of making correct decisions under pressure. Technology can help us, automatic systems can assist us, but in the end, when things get complicated, we still depend on human judgment, accumulated experience, and the ability to work as a team. That night taught me that no matter how many years of experience you have, aviation always has something new to teach you. That humility is an essential virtue for any pilot, because the moment we think we've seen everything, life presents us with a combination of situations we've never faced before. But it also taught me that all the training, all the preparation, all the hours of study and practice are worth it when you need them. When alarms are sounding, when systems are failing, when you have hundreds of lives depending on your decisions, it's your preparation that makes the difference between a happy ending and a tragedy. And that's why, every time someone asks me if all the preparation our profession requires is worth it, all the responsibility we carry, all the nights away from home flying over dark oceans, I remember that September night, Dorothy thanking me for saving her life, 411 passengers who made it home safely, even when everything seemed to be going wrong. The answer is always the same. It's worth it because there's no better feeling in the world than knowing you made a difference in other people's lives, that you had the competence, experience, and composure needed to bring everyone safely back to the ground, even when the Queen of the Skies needed to show all her majesty to overcome the challenges that night had in store. Because that's what we do. We don't just pilot aircraft. We care for lives, we protect dreams. We connect families, and once in a while, when everything goes wrong at the same time, we prove that the combination of advanced technology, rigorous training, solid experience, and teamwork is still capable of working miracles at 10,000 feet. If you've ever flown as a passenger, you can be sure that up front in the cockpit, there's a team of trained professionals prepared for any situation that might arise. Pilots who regularly practice emergency scenarios, who constantly study, who deeply respect the responsibility they carry. Because for us, there's no such thing as a routine flight. Every takeoff is a new opportunity to demonstrate our competence. Every landing is a new confirmation that we did our job correctly. And when you disembark at your destination, you might not know that we encountered severe turbulence at 37,000 feet, or that we had to deviate around thunderstorms, or that one of the systems had a minor failure that we resolved quietly by following our procedures. Because our job is to make your journey safe and comfortable, regardless of the challenges we might face along the way. It's a profession that demands a lot, but offers even more in return. The satisfaction of mastering one of the most complex machines ever created by humans. The privilege of seeing the world from a unique perspective, flying above the clouds and watching sunrise over infinite oceans. The responsibility of caring for hundreds of lives with every flight. And once in a while, the opportunity to make a real difference in the lives of people like Dorothy. Because ultimately, that's what commercial aviation is about. People caring for people, using all available technology, training, and experience to ensure everyone gets home safely. And when everything goes wrong at the same time, like that memorable night over the Atlantic, that's when we discover what we're really capable of. If you enjoyed this story from the skies and want to hear more accounts like this, subscribe to the Black Box channel so you don't miss the next episodes. Leave a comment telling us what flight situation you'd like to hear about. Share this video with anyone else who's curious about aviation, and follow our next report straight from the cockpit. Until the next flight.